Serious, 911 operators at Reddit. What is a call that keeps you up at night? I'm a firefighter and I overheard a call on the radio from another unit. They were dispatched to a possible suicide. The information given while the crews were en route was patient's wife came home and found a note under the door saying, "Honey, I'm already gone. If you're reading this, please do not come in and see me like this." The crews arrived and the next thing you hear on the radio was the paramedic telling dispatch code 4, meaning patient is deceased, and in the background you can hear the wife screaming bloody murder as loud as she could. It was chilling. Edit, sorry for the spelling. I was a dispatcher about 17 years ago. There were some funny calls I like to talk about. Like the person who wanted to complain that their drug dealer stole their laptop. The one I don't like the most is the long call with the woman who was concerned about the landlord who didn't like her and her boyfriend was in the background confirming her statements that the landlord was creepy. They found her body floating in the river the next day. Except it turned out it was the boyfriend who killed her. Also, the recorded calls you have to listen to during training where they intentionally play you the sound of people dying on the phone while talking to a dispatcher so that you understand what the job might entail and they can see how you react to it to see if you can stomach it and keep talking and providing details to units. 1 AM and the phone rings and I pick up to hear a man screaming on the other end. No words. Just screaming. Finally get him to tell me what happened and he told me he heard gunshots in his house and went to see what happened and found his brother in his room. He had shot himself. I got a 911 call about a vehicle that ran off the road. The caller told me that the female driver was unconscious but had a pulse. He then proceeded to tell me that the passenger was a fatal. I asked if he had checked for a pulse, at which point he told me no. It was a young child that had been decapitated. I asked him to find anything he could to cover the child because I didn't want the mother to regain consciousness and have that be the last image she had of her child. It was 9:30 am. I'd been on shift since 7 am. All the ambulances had checked in for morning mileage and radio checks. All was good. Call comes in on the emergency line. My son is not breathing. Okay. We got this. Start going through the steps of checking for a pulse breath while dispatching the closest ambulance. I'm almost to the part where we start CPR when the ambulance calls back dispatch. Our rig is dead. You got to be ducking kidding me. You called in this morning with a radio check. Did you not check your goddamn ambulance? Nearest ambulance is one whole county over. 30 minutes. 30 minutes for a situation that needs immediate medical intervention. The mother is screaming on the phone. Crying. The sister comes in and starts screaming the name of her brother. Semicolon. I have to tell them the ETA for an ambulance is 30 minutes. Semicolon. It's been almost 10 years since I was in EMS dispatch and I occasionally wake up in a cold sweat thinking about that call. One thing that makes me horrified to this day was when I was first staring out as a 911 operator. I picked up the phone and I heard an older woman on the line say that someone was in her house and she didn't have anyone or anything to protect her. She then told me that she was hiding and whoever it was is coming near her. I then heard silence on the line. I later found out she was kidnapped and never found. I still have nightmares about that day and I wish there was something I could do. Worst call I got was when I worked overtime on Christmas Day and got a call from a father who returned from a business trip and found his 19-year-old son hanging in the bedroom. Haunts me until today. Former operator. Victim needed police. A bit later hearing shots and screaming. Then silence for a bit. Hear another voice angrily saying no. And hangs up. Was caught. Doesn't keep me up at night but I do think about it time to time. Had a daughter call in for her elderly mother experiencing chest pains. 10 minutes pass and I call for an ETA. They tell me they're there. The daughter gave me the wrong address, they had recently moved and she gave the old address. The chest pains turned to trouble breathing. ETA 10 minutes. Mother isn't responding. Daughter is crying over the line. Paramedics arrive, perform CPR and even use the defibrillator. Sadly she didn't make it. I heard all this over the phone at the time. It hit me a bit hard, but you get over it. I feel sorry for the daughter. She probably lies thinking that she was responsible for giving the wrong address and causing her mother to pass away. Early on in my career, I took a call from a father who found his 12-year-old daughter hanging. Her legs were still kicking and he was in a panic as to what to do. I never learned the outcome of that call, but I never forgot the panic in his voice. And now as a parent I know I never will. Happened to a friend of mine, but it's something I always think of and the thought just haunts me. She worked in the police emergency call center. She covered my shift as I wasn't feeling too good. She was working the day of the Christchurch mosque shooting. She said the phones were going off with people calling about the shootings. She spoke to a lady who was in the mosque. The lady was frantically screaming and she could hear the gun going off and all the screaming in the mosques. The lady stopped screaming, but she could still hear what was going on in the mosque. She still has PTSD from the event and took time off work. We don't know who the lady was or where she is, but this call will always haunt us. It always scares me that could have been me. Not quite sure if this counts, but my father works EMS. If you get a proper segue into the topic, he will tell you about the worst calls he's been on. The worst call I've heard was a suicide. Never a good case. He remembers arriving and seeing the guy's troubled loved ones. He made his way to the bedroom and got the scene of the bloody and gory mess ingrained into his head permanently. It was a suicide by 12 gauge blast to the face. He didn't eat for a few days and had to take off of work to digest the incident. My aunt listened to a 12-year-old girl and her friend get murdered by her dad. She hasn't been the same since. I haven't been dispatching very long, so I am sure that I will have plenty of stories. But what immediately comes to mind was a call I took the week after I started talking to people directly. Elderly man came on the line. His voice was slurred and I had a hard time understanding his address. He apologized and I told him it was because his phone was breaking up. He replied, "Oh. Well, I just wanted you to know that I am going to shoot myself in the head." We had protocol, but my instinct was immediately to plead with him. To tell him help was on the way. And to get him to keep talking to me. I wasn't able to get 2 sentences out before I heard the shot. Dead on arrival. 2 hours later, I get a call from the same address. A woman screaming that she hadn't heard from her father, a cancer patient. After his daily nap, she came to check on him and found a blood-soaked recliner in the backyard. I will never forget that stupid address or his voice. Guy hung himself outside our station, near where the officers park the cars, on Christmas morning. Just tied an electric cord around his neck and stepped off the wall. No note, no call for help. Found him at dawn. Uncle was a 911 dispatcher a couple years ago. He said that most of the calls were pretty standard except for one. He gets a call at 7:30ish at night. There's a woman sobbing and she says that she found her son's suicide note. So he's going through the steps, asking where she thinks he is when he hears a loud bang and then a thump followed by another loud bang and thump. The line is silent after that. Since this was a suicide, they had a police officer coming along as well. He heard the officer open the door followed by him saying "holy shit." He then tells my uncle that there are 2 bodies, both with their heads blown off. Officers and paramedics arrive and the call ends. My uncle was told the next day what happened. Apparently this young adult was abused by his mother. He bought a shotgun, killed her and then killed himself. The cries of a mother when she realizes her infant is not breathing. Hubby of a former dispatcher. She worked nights by herself and I think hadn't even worked a year there. Knew the officers really well since obviously she was the only person there. Officer pulls a guy over for a routine stop, but whatever reason he pulled a gun and shot the officer, then took off. Officer calls into dispatch, so she's calling EMTs and all that and gives a mile marker. From my understanding, other cops got on the scene first and were with him. EMT calls back for the location and she somehow gave the wrong one. Off by like a mile. She was pretty shaken by it as it was someone she considered a friend. He lived. She found out later about the mix-up like a week later. It didn't seem to affect anything or delay him getting help, but it messed her up worse. Got put on leave and no one in the department could talk to her. Got PTSD from it and was in a bad place for a while. My dad is a paramedic in the UK. He told me that dead or dying babies are the worst calls to go to. You hear it on the radio and your heart just sinks. There were 2 calls he told me about that have really stuck in my mind. One of them. A woman had been cut in half by a train. Because of the positioning. She was still alive as the bleeding was plugged. And they moved her, she died. The second one was a 16-year-old girl who had died on the train tracks after touching the live rail. Dad said calls like that aren't uncommon, but because I was about 17, at the time all he could think about was that it could have been me. I worked for 411. I got fired because the girl called. Begged me not to hang up on her. She can only function via a computer and her computer was dead. All she wanted was a phone number to call HP. It took me half an hour. And our AVG call was 36 minutes. I had 5 different bosses from 5 floors come yell at me. You should have hung up on her. Charged her and then she could just keep calling is what they told me. Duck that. I quit right then and there. No one is ever going to yell at me for helping another human being. No one. I don't care if you are a shareholder of TELUS. Medical dispatch here. No call keeps me up at night. None. If you do this job and these things stick to you, you either won't last long or your mind will deteriorate. You might wonder how I do it, and it's quite simple. I approach each and every call as a case-by-case problem. And each problem needs different solutions. To me, I don't help someone. I solve a problem. Sure, I feel empathy and anger sometimes, but it passes and disappears in a matter of seconds. In the end, I do my job as mechanically as possible, and it doesn't make a difference for the caller but changes the world for me and my health. Used to be an operator and then became an air traffic controller. Those dreams took over the 911 dreams. My story is a very common thing many dispatchers may relate to. The guilt and the overwhelming feeling of sorrow and regret. It'd been an average day. Nothing out of the ordinary. Call comes in on the emergency line. He's been stabbed. Okay. So I start reciting the script. Start going through the steps of checking for a pulse breath while dispatching the closest ambulance. Reminding them to leave the stab wound and the knife alone. Then dispatch got back to me and I find out the nearest ambulance is 37 minutes away. 37 minutes for a situation that needs immediate medical intervention. The woman is screaming on the phone. Crying. I can hear a crowd gather around the boy's body. All screaming and crying. The ambulance didn't come on time. It was too late. I went back home and watched on the news of the story of the boy who got stabbed by a gang. Watched as the family cried at the loss of their boy. Guilt started to appear, as if I should have done more. Or if it was my fault. I still haven't forgotten. It has stayed with me till this day.